Welcome to Little Steps, Big Gains and our series on balance for life. In a previous video, we talked about the 3 balance strategies that we use to regain our balance, including ankle, hip, and stepping strategies. A link to that video is in the description below. And here we're going to start an overview of our 3 sensory systems that interplay as a team to make up our balance. If you find this video educational or insightful, please press the like button below and subscribe to get notifications for upcoming videos to come. In order to maintain our balance, our brain needs one very important thing: communication. It needs constant status updates about where our body is in space. And with all this feedback, it can oversee our movements and maintain our stability. Now, in order to get that feedback, it's going to call upon 3 main sensory systems. First one is our somatosensory system. Now, this is feedback through our limbs about tactile and proprioceptive input, and we will talk about that. Our vestibular system, this is in the inner ear, and it's constantly sending signals to our brain about where we are, especially relative to our head position. We'll talk about that. And then it's going to get input through our visual system, our eyes, and they're going to constantly tell our brain where we are, where our environment is, and we'll talk about that too. So once the brain gets all of this feedback from those 3 systems, it can oversee everything and maintain our stability. Not only do each of these individual systems have a unique role, but the brain does not rely on them equally. So for example, if I'm on firm surface with my eyes open, 70% of my status updates are coming from my somatosensory system alone in my limbs, 20% from the vestibular system, and only 10% should be coming from the visual system. But then, if I go walk on an uneven surface like grass, 60% should be coming from the vestibular system, 30% from the visual system, only 10% should be coming from the somatosensory system. So basically, the brain relies on different systems for different situations as these interrelated systems work as a team. In this video, I'm going to break down an overview of each individual system, how it functions, what happens when we have weakness there, and what we can do about it. This is a brief overview. If you find it insightful, please stay tuned because in upcoming videos, I'm going to further break down each individual system with more details, how it functions, and specific interventions for each one. Let's start with the somatosensory system. This is from our limbs that gives input to our brain about where we are based on 2 sources. First, tactile input. This is touch, pressure, and vibration, especially at the bottom of our feet. And second, proprioceptive input. This is information from the joints about their position, sense, and motion. So when you put that together, tactile and proprioceptive input, that makes up our somatosensory system. So for example, if I'm tipping back, the pressure in my heels, that's the tactile input, and the change of the angle of my ankles and the ligaments and the muscle tension around it, that's my proprioceptive input. You put that together and it tells my brain you're tipping back, responds. That's the somatosensory system. Now, when our brain is deprived of this information, it can result in postural instability. A few examples of this include nerve damage with diabetic neuropathy, edema, swelling at the bottom of our feet because now there's this fluid barrier there, reduced ankle range of motion, immobility, various neurological conditions such as multiple sclerosis, where there's impairments in the proprioceptive pathways and nerve conduction velocity. Parkinson's disease, where there's an increased threshold for proprioceptive input. Ataxia, where there's brain-related changes between the cerebellum and the front to integrate that sensory input. And then age-related changes are a few of the causes that may result in somatosensory deficits. When we have somatosensory deficits, there are 2 main treatment approaches. First is remediation, and this is strategies to restore or strengthen the system. And second is compensation. This is strategies to navigate around the impairments. When it comes to remediation, there is research to support improvement potential with peripheral damage like diabetic neuropathy, neurological conditions like Parkinson's, MS, ataxia, and age-related changes. Some of these remediation strategies include somatosensory-based balance training, high intensity motor training, foot sensory stimulation, gait training, balance training. And in the therapy world, we use a lot of sensory reweighting, where we take away other systems like the visual system through occluding it or distorting it, forcing the body to use the somatosensory system to uptrain it. There's also research to support improving the proprioceptive system through slow movements such as Tai Chi. If you're interested, I have some resources in the description below. While remedial strategies work to restore the system, compensatory strategies are techniques to navigate around the problem. This can be done through increasing that proprioceptive input, such as through the use of assisted devices to hold on to give you that input, grab bars, changing your footwear, maybe something thinner for some people, weighted backpacks, weighted vests, ankle weights. Everyone's a little bit different. But overall, when we're deprived of that information, the brain is going to compensate by going to the other two systems to try to get that feedback, including the visual and the vestibular systems. As a brief overview, the vestibular system is a system in the inner ear that gives feedback to our brain about where our body is in space, especially relative to our head position. Now, it's made up of 3 semicircular canals, these loops, okay, in each ear. Each canal has fluid in it, and it's oriented to a different position of the head. So if I move my head into that position, it is going to move the fluid, stimulate these hair cells, send signals to the brain, and tell the brain where I am and how I'm moving. Impairments to the system could be due to head injury, viral infections, aging, or neurological conditions. A few remediation strategies to restore this system include medications such as antibiotics if caused by a viral infection, and vestibular rehabilitation, where we can go to a specialist and they can look at why we have vestibular impairments and create custom interventions. For example, a very common cause is something called BPPV, which is benign positional proximal vertigo, where we have a misplaced crystal in one of those canals. And they can put us through positional maneuvers to reorient that crystal, such as the Epley maneuver. But they can also work on gaze stabilization exercises, working with the head and the eyes, which we'll talk about, balancing gaits. They can create a custom program to try to remediate those vestibular impairments. Compensatory strategies for an impaired vestibular system include taking caution or avoiding triggers. This includes head turns and positional changes. So wait a minute when going from laying to sitting. Try to avoid head turns when walking. Make sure you hold on or avoid head turns with things like washing your hair. Take caution or avoid those triggers. But in general, once again, when we have an impaired system, our brain is going to rely on the other two systems to compensate. And once again, if we have an impaired somatosensory system, now our brain is going to really go to that visual system. When it comes to the visual system, our eyes are constantly giving feedback to our brain about where we are in space and the environment around us. So if I'm tipping forward, my eyes are telling my brain, you're falling, respond. Now, when we think of the visual system, we often focus on static visual acuity, the ability to read letters on a line, but life is much more complicated. We need dynamic visual acuity, the ability to keep our eyes focused during movements, during day-to-day activities. A really great example of this is the ability to keep the eyes focused during head turns. That is called the vestibular ocular reflex. And we need that because we need to know that we might be in motion, but the world is not. So we need that dynamic visual acuity, and it's so important to assess and treat this with our patients because there is a correlation between an impaired dynamic visual acuity and risk for falls. So this is so important. Now, not only do we need static and dynamic visual acuity, but we need the coordination in the muscles around the eyes. That is called ocular motor coordination. We need our eyes constantly in sync with each other and the brain to give it the correct feedback. A few of these movements include saccades, jumping back and forth between targets, tracking with smooth pursuits, fixating, convergence, accommodation. These are all so important. We think about how we need the coordination in our limbs, but don't think about the eyes. But for example, saccades, jumping back and forth, is actually necessary for turning and correlated with freezing and Parkinson's disease. Convergence is the ability to control our depth perception and necessary for stairs. So we absolutely need ocular motor coordination for a functioning visual system. So overall, a functioning visual system is much more than just the ability to read letters on a line. And it's for that reason that there can be many dangers in becoming overly visually dependent for our balance. And what I mean by that is if an individual has an impaired somatosensory system, an impaired vestibular system, they may rely heavily on the visual system and become overly dependent on it. And this can be dangerous if the visual system is removed in situations like low lights, restaurants, movie theaters, bright lights, maybe when we can't see our feet. Those are situations in which an individual who is visually dependent may be at a high risk for falls. Remedial strategies to improve the visual system include vision therapy to improve ocular motor coordination and control of the eyes, and vestibular therapy, improving that dynamic visual acuity and strengthening the relationship between the visual and the vestibular systems. Compensatory techniques or strategies to work around the impairments include increasing visual input, night lights, tape along the stairs, and then seeing an eye care specialist to ensure proper prescriptions and possibly prisms. In general, knowledge is power. Therefore, once we know which sensory systems we are reliant on, we have insight as to when to be more careful and how to address each one. I hope that you found this overview insightful or educational, and if you did, please press that like button below. Check out the description for resources and references. Also, if you found this interesting, I'm going to break down each individual system into more details and provide specific interventions for each one. So make sure to press the subscribe button below for notifications of upcoming videos. And finally, in the description, please check out my free exercise programs because together, little steps, we can make some big gains.